everybody. Okay. So I wanted to focus on the data table slash graphing stuff for today. And to do that, I'm going to share with you guys a Google Sheet. It was asked yesterday, do we have to make the graphs by hand? And I said, no, it doesn't say that in the instructions. And many of you may decide to use Google Spreadsheets, Google Sheets, or even Microsoft Excel. Just keep in mind that on Friday, by the end of class on Friday, you are going to be submitting in total your assessment documents, and that will have to be done digitally. So if you're making a digital graph, you already have everything you need there. That's awesome. If you are doing a graph by hand, which is totally acceptable, know that you'll have to take a picture of it and input it into the submission place. And I'm not putting that on until Friday because I don't want anybody to submit too early because there could be improvements made. First thing, make sure you remember that it is a summative assessment, so you're gaining summative points. So just remember two things. Number one, when the stakes are a little higher, that all tends to make us strive to do our best, even though you should be striving to do your best at all times. And number two, because you're earning summative points, my role switches from being, really super helpful with your projects and guiding you through it, to stepping back and saying, a lot of this stuff you know how to do because we've gone over it in the notes, and I'm going to be reluctant to sort of guide you in the same way that I would have on your poster projects, for example. So if you've got a question about like, hey, I can't remember how to determine the independent and dependent variable, there's notes for that. And there are hundreds of YouTube videos that you can access, the internet as well. So you can kind of think of this a little bit like an open note test. So keep that in mind. But if I tell you, hey, go check your notes, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just recognizing this is a summative assignment and not a formative one. Okay, so if you are going to be doing when you're constructing your data tables, right? I think most of you are to the point where you're thinking about what's the data table look like when you're collecting it. I'm going to give you some advice, especially for those of you who want to create your graph digitally. Microsoft, or excuse me, Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel, they do like to have the data looking a certain way so that you can easily turn that into graphs. Okay, so I have two examples here that I'm going to look at with you guys. This is the first one. So here's my experimental question. Does the date of birth of Canadian hockey players affect their age? And you don't even need to see a graph of this to understand that. Of course, there's a relationship between your date of birth and your age, and so this graph should be no surprise. But take a look, importantly, how I have this data table arranged. Sometimes, like Microsoft Excel requires a spreadsheet like this likes to have data in a 2-column format. And so I have 3 columns in this chart here, in this data table. However, the ones that I graph from are these two. They are my 2 variables, right? My date of birth and my age of players. Those are my variables from my experimental question. So that's what I need to select when I turn this into a graph. And just to remind you how to make a graph in Excel or in this Google Sheets, you simply select all your data, highlight it all, and then hit Insert and Chart. And remember, Excel doesn't know what your experimental, I keep saying Excel because guys, for ages I use Microsoft Excel, so I apologize. So the spreadsheet doesn't know what your experimental question is. It doesn't know what research you're trying to do. So it's going to give you a graph, any old graph. It's up to you to know what graph you need. For this type of data where I have just two numbers, right? One number plotted against another number, the best options are going to be either line or a scatter plot. I prefer a scatter plot, so I'm going to pick a scatter plot. No matter what kind of graph you're choosing, the graph needs to be a good graph by all of our definitions. So you need to utilize the tools. This is one of the, not a disadvantage, but one of the things you need to pay attention to if you're having the computer make the graph for you is you have to tell it what the labels are, what the title is, and you can do that on this panel here that opens up. It's called the chart editor. If you lose it, if you exit out, if you click the 3 dots on the graph and you hit edit chart, it will bring that panel back up. And so, for example, if I need to add a y-axis label, I don't see that as an option, which is a pain in the butt. Customize chart and axis titles. That is not helpful. Left axis. Oh, that just tells me where it is. Okay, well, there should be a way to put a y-axis label on there. Here we go, vertical axis. I don't see the option to put a label on there, but there is a way to do so. Even if you have to just add a text box later, you should have all the proper conventions for a good graph. Okay. All right. So you can see this spits out my graph. No matter what your graph you're making, the key is it should allow you to answer your experimental question. That is the key to the graph. So in this case, I think it definitely allows me to do that. I can see there's a clear relationship between the date of birth and the age of somebody because I see a pattern here. There are ways to look at this pattern. You guys remember you can add a trend line, whatever analysis tools you guys use and know how to do, try to apply them here. See if they work. Okay, you certainly won't be penalized for trying things to analyze your graph and make it your analysis more robust. Okay. I want to give you an example if you had categorical data, categories instead of numbers as one of your variables. So, the question here is, does the type of car, which is not a number, right, it's a category. Can you guys see this, or is it too zoomed out? I'm going to go to 150%, just in case. All right, so I've got the starting of my data table here. I can add some boxes if it makes you feel more like it actually looks like a data table. This is not the way you would want to plan your data table for an experiment like this. Reason being, as you look at more and more trials of the experiment, okay, you make more measurements, you have to move to the right on your data table, and after you get to maybe 20 or 30, you're way over here and you can't even see all your data. So that is not the way to design your data table for an experiment like this. For an experiment like this, get rid of that graph. Here is some made-up data. Okay, but I have the trial number, which is simply saying how many of each of these compact or types, categories, how many data points do I have for each of them. This column is kind of a placeholder. And then I have my categories as columns. Okay, so you should add every category you have, every group in your experiment gets its own column. So my question is, does the type of car affect the gas mileage? And I'm going to insert a chart here. And let's see what it gives me. It starts with a scatter plot. See, it just gives you what it thinks you want, and it's not all that intelligent. The question is, can I answer the question with this presentation of the graph? Can you guys tell me which type of car gets the best gas mileage? That's a direct question to me. Can you guys speak up? Put it in the chat.
Compact cars?
You say compact cars, why? Thank you, Lydia.
Their dots are on average higher than others.
Okay, yeah, pay attention to what you just said, right? You said on average the dots are higher, but you have to make that assessment just by looking at the graph. So also consider if you need to graph all the data or if you can just graph some kind of a summary statistic like an average. Okay, so knowing all these data points, especially if I looked at, let's say I looked at 100 cars in each class, in each category, this would be an awfully long graph. Okay, so what I'm going to do instead is I want to decide that my average would be the best thing to look at, and so I'm going to calculate an average. Now, you guys know how to calculate an average the old-fashioned way. You add up all the numbers, and then you divide by how many numbers there are. That is time-consuming. I asked you guys to spend at least 20 minutes gathering data. So these columns might be rather long. You might have hundreds of data points. If you're doing coin flips, if you flip a coin for 20 minutes and record the data every time, you are going to have hundreds of data samples, data points. That is fine, okay? I'm asking you to do that. However, here's how you can get this spreadsheet to help you out. You can create a formula. So instead of graphing every data point, I only want the average. I'm going to make a new data table, which is just for my average data. And the average of the compact car data is what I want in this point. So I click equals, and as soon as you hit the equals button, this knows that you want to have it calculate something. And so you type in the function you want it to do typically. So you would type in the word average, and then you open a parenthesis, and you highlight all the numbers you want the average of. You hit enter, and you get the average. Okay? Sheets is smart enough to know, well, I'll just do it for each one. I don't want to overcomplicate things. It shouldn't be too difficult for you to have it calculate several averages if you need to. Equals average, open parentheses. If you don't know how to do something, if you think you want Excel to calculate something else for you, a percent, some other type of statistic, you look up a YouTube video. There's often a way to figure out how to do that on Google Sheets or Excel. All right, so now when I highlight this data table and I have it add me insert a chart, see what it gives me. Ooh, it gives me a pie graph. So pie graphs are great for percents, and that might be what I'm after. But can I answer, does the type of car affect their gas mileage? Maybe from this. I'm going to check this graph out here. This one puts my categories along the x-axis. That's my independent variable. If that's my independent variable, then that makes some sense. And then it has my average value along the y-axis, and it has very clearly the relation. Can I answer the question with this graph? What say the class? What say you?
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, you can. So that's the goal. If you for some reason don't pick like the absolute best form of the graph to answer the question with, but you can still answer the question with it, then you're not going to lose points. Okay, you just might get a comment on your evaluation for this test saying this may not have been the best way to show the data to get an answer to your question.